So welcome everyone. I feel like it's been a little while. I know it hasn't been since we've seen you all, but it's great to have you back into the space and to continue on with our small business series here. A reminder really quick, just up front, that you can start scheduling office hours with Percy from our last session, and more will be available after today, and we will circulate the link. And Sylvie is also available, as well as Shanna and Larry from our Race Forward team. So as you all are meeting and starting to build different parts of your projects out, if that would be helpful and you need help scheduling, just let us know. But yeah, we're super excited today. I'm not gonna belabor the point. I'm gonna pass it right on over to Sylvie so that we can get started.
Great, thanks so much, Sloan. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. For those of you for whom it's afternoon. So today we're gonna talk about small business ownership and how that translates into household and community wealth. And I'm super excited about our two speakers. So we have Lenin Agudo, who's the director of the Small Business Development Center at Widener University. And then we have Dr. Lomax R. Campbell, who's the president and CEO of Third Eye Networks. And he's also the chairman and co-founder of Niche Market Insights Foundation. So I've joked around, Lenin and Lomax will have a podcast after today, but they've got a great lineup for you all, and you all know the drill. Any questions, put them in the chat. I'll be monitoring. If it's anything that seems like it needs to be answered during the presentation, I will gently interrupt. Otherwise, I'll wait till the end of each presentation to address those. So I'm gonna kick it over to Lenin, who will be starting.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Let me get my presentation up in the screen. That way we can get all set. Let's see. Let me put this up. There we go. All right. Please raise your thumbs if you can see this presentation. Thank you so much. Now, raise your hand if you're happy today. Okay, some of you, not all of you. Great, wonderful. Thank you so much for participating today. My name is Lenin Agudo. I'm the director of Widener University Small Business Development Center. And our topic of the day that we could probably study for years is small business ownership as household and community wealth building. It's a packed title, but I'm hoping that I would be able to share a little bit of knowledge, my experience working through this process as we move forward. So who am I? I serve as director of the Small Business Development Center for Widener University, and we are one of 16 centers in Pennsylvania. We have centers of excellence, 2 of them, and also a growth academy as specialty services that we provide to the community. I'll give you more details later on, but just as an intro, we support Hispanic entrepreneurs specifically, and entrepreneurs that are working with the health and life science industries as well, as a specialty service that we provide through the center. So who am I? You could tell that probably I am a Monopoly buff, yes. Currently, I work for the Small Business Development Center, as I shared with you. In my past career, I worked for the City of Reading as Community and Economic Development Director. I was also a small business owner and continue to be one of a company called LaGraff Investments. The reason you have a plunger there is because it was in real estate. And part of my experience being an entrepreneur was plunging toilets for my clients a lot. And I gotta tell you, I learned so much from this experience, all the way to, or I would say at least equally, as I learned from my academic experience at Harvard and University of Pennsylvania. But I'm also an immigrant. I am originally from Cuenca, Ecuador. And the reason I share this is because this all shapes the way I see the world and the way I'm committed towards hopefully making a better tomorrow, at least from the entrepreneurship side. The agenda for today is this. We're going to have 5 topics in general. You're going to receive this notes, and you're going to be able to link yourself for additional information. I have linked the majority of the documents here to websites and good case studies. that you would be able to further research on your own. My goal for today is really to engage you and get you thinking about how you can take the first step in your community to start building that ecosystem of services that would be provided to entrepreneurs. So let's get started. Number one, a couple of basic ideas, right? Number one, we know that equality versus equity is a very big deal. Great, because it also talks about and exemplifies what equality versus equity is. You have seen this before, and if you haven't, this is a good time. The difference between equality and equity really boils down to how we start in our lives, right? I've seen lots of examples, lots of pictures, but I like these ones the most, although I see some drawbacks that you could also probably think about. But basically, the references on the racetrack in between equality and equity is an important one. Here we have an oval track. The outer lanes, as you're aware, are actually longer than the inner lanes. That means that the runners on the outside have to run longer. So naturally, the way this game is set up is you start with the runners, you set up the runners in different places along the tracks, something like this, right? Leveling the playing field when we're discussing about equality and equity is very important. So leveling the playing field means that acknowledging that we as people will start in different positions. But at the end of the day, we're all running the same race, specifically if it becomes a race about entrepreneurship, and sometimes could be very competitive in the business world. So this is a mock-up metaphor of what I feel the difference between equality and equity is exemplified. So quick question for you guys to start thinking about this. What does this mean to the entrepreneurial world? A second basic topic that I want to introduce is really those types of entrepreneurs. And I know that many of you are chamber leaders, economic development leaders, and community advocates for entrepreneurship and foundation leaders. So you may have come across some of these entrepreneurs. I like to call the solo entrepreneurs, those who are really a one-man show, where the owner is a business, or the owner rather is the business. And as you're aware, their services are the products, and most, if not all, revenues come from their work. So one person doing the work, they are the business. The extra income entrepreneur is those folks that are already have a source of income, but maybe the source of income is a pension, a working spouse, a full-time job of some sorts. And they start a business sometimes because of a hobby, based on a special skill that they may have, and they try to run their business like that. Many times these entrepreneurs start as a part-time business to make some extra money and to make some extra income, or maybe to test the market. Is this business really going to fly? Before they go deep into, or they make a deep dive into opening a shop. This distinction is important because our topic is household and community wealth building. And not all these entrepreneurs are actually creating a business that will generate them a lot of wealth. And this is important for us to note. The entrepreneurs that we meet on a daily basis and that we mostly think about when we think about businesses is really the small business owner, right? So who is the small business owner? Is that person that has many cases a brick and mortar space. And this is the only thing the business owner does. This is primarily sometimes the only source of income that they have. And more importantly, they make a career out of establishing a small business. So a few key small business examples could be in grocery stores in some of our cities, or the Main Street type of businesses that we see in many different areas. It's important to mention that the Small Business Administration, and you've probably heard this, defines a small business as a business that employs less than 500 people, right? That's a hell of a small business if you ask me. So the definition is very broad. And also, basically, it allows us to hone in into what services we can provide. A fourth category is the high growth type of entrepreneur, type of business. A lot of the entrepreneurs you may come across, they want to start and grow big, right? They dream of having a huge corporation one day and maybe hundreds of employees. So an example of a high growth business is really those types of businesses that you can scale. Generally speaking, we see a lot of the consumer electronic companies that have been able to do that. We've also seen larger companies like Google, Tesla, Amazon, Airbnb, and recently Uber that have that capacity to scale. That at the beginning, they have a very good business model and they're able to scale. It's important to note that all these businesses have a lot of requirements. And the last one is really the inventors. The inventors are those guys that we all know. Maybe we have some of them in our families that come up with the next big thing, the widget, and really makes a patent in many cases and actually sells this or collects royalties from it. These are also entrepreneurs and their business models behind it. So today, the topic is, how do we build wealth from being a business owner? So I researched a few things and I came up with this example and this definition of household and community wealth building. So several people define it as a comprehensive approach that aims to improve the ability for individuals and communities to advance asset ownership. Keyword here, asset ownership. So bottom line, you build wealth via assets. I want you to keep this in mind because we're going to make a distinction that I think you're going to find interesting in the next couple of slides. So please meet real estate investor Joanne Byrne from our own city, Philadelphia. She's the great-grandmother who invests in Philly real estate to build generational wealth for her family. And I thought this story was great because she is one of those entrepreneurs who retired and decided that in order for her to build wealth for her grandchildren and generations after her, she needs to have assets, and in this case, in real estate. But we're talking about building wealth. So let's spend a minute about, generally speaking, what building wealth essentials look like. So maybe you're in this path as well. Generally, building wealth, you need to be disciplined in your financial management, either in your personal or business aspect. That means you need to have your taxes in place and file them for sure, maintaining actual records and accurate records, and also ensuring that you're credit worthy. And we certainly heard great comments from our presenters in the last 2 weeks about credit worthiness and the importance to build wealth, and also the challenges that we have in our communities. But also, to build wealth, you need to have the ability to buy a home or real estate. Historically speaking, that has been one of the primary ways that families build wealth. The third way is really having a retirement plan. Maybe many of you have one already, but entrepreneurs, specifically those that are business owners, 90% of the ones I speak with are banking on the business doing well as a way to become retired in the future or selling it in the future. But they do not have a retirement plan in place simply because of the cash flow issues that many businesses have. The other one that you're very aware is the healthcare insurance. And in order to avoid nightmares, it's very important. And the fifth one, which is we're going to devote some time at the end, is collaborative opportunities and finding yourself or positioning yourself in your business or your community to access the social capital that we're going to talk soon. And social capital is in many cases better than financial capital because you get a better start. So think about these ways of building wealth and take a minute to think about the entrepreneurs that you have in your community and how do they size up in terms of the building wealth essentials. So, because you are in your community and I want you to immediately start thinking about your plan and how you're going to build a better ecosystem, think about this four things, right? How easy is it to buy a home if you're a business person in your community? Many stories tell that it's very difficult to get all the paperwork in place if you are an entrepreneur that doesn't have a definitive source of income, right? Or a recurring source of income like we do when we have a job. It gets more complicated. So which lenders in your communities are providing home loans for entrepreneurs, or in many cases, self-employed individuals? How many BIPOC business owners are members of your chamber? Lots of chambers struggle with this. Lots of chambers struggle with small business membership, period, because they're focused more on, or unfortunately, what they have the most is corporate members that sustain and pay for their expenditures within the investments that they have to make. If you do have these type of organizations, do you have BIPOC initiatives for small business owners? What type of initiatives does your community have, right? So really, I want you to assess this in your mind, because this is going to be step one towards understanding better the pros and the areas for improvement within your ecosystem. And if you do have money, who do you go to get investment advice? If entrepreneurs accumulate business wealth, who is the trusted person in the community or the trusted organization where you go to and say, what do I do next? So food for thought, and maybe some homework as well for you guys. The second point in our agenda is really to talk about the programs that we have in the United States, as well as local and homegrown programs that are supporting entrepreneurs. And here's what I would like you to take away from this slide. In my experience working for over 15 years with small business owners and in the economic development world, I can tell you that small business programs and technical assistance programs, they aim to reduce the business risk. Basically, how do we reduce costs, the time, the money that it takes to run a business? How to make a better spreadsheet. The good ones are pretty much helping you connect with new markets, government contract, international business, others. Suppliers, those are the ones that are doing well. However, the TA providers, as well as the small business programs, they do not build wealth. The reality is that in some of those programs, we don't even talk about how to build business wealth, how to pretty much create wealth or maintain generational wealth. And the principles of wealth investing basically get set aside because we're speaking about how to run a better business. So in your community, it's important to keep that in mind, because if we're serious about wealth creation, how do we do it? And which organizations can actually help entrepreneurs make these decisions? There's really 3 steps to making money and building wealth. The number 1 is you make money. Number 2 is you save money. And the third one is you invest money. That's how you build wealth, not necessarily making a better business. Now, having a great business, having a better spreadsheet, reducing the risk may lead to better income, revenue, profit, which may lead to wealth building, but it's not a given. It's not a given. So keep that in mind as you continue to encourage entrepreneurs or create an ecosystem that is focused on this specifically. Now, when we speak about entrepreneurs, especially entrepreneurs of color or minority entrepreneurs, as some call them, this is even a wider gap that we have to amend. So my attempt today is to give you an overview of what resources are out there. And basically, there's 3 categories of programs and technical assistance in many communities across the state. Obviously, you have the federal resource partners, powerhouse organizations that I like, and I'll talk about them, and also community growing. Now, this is for you to consider. We've heard this throughout presentations, but when it comes to technical assistance and working with our communities, it's much more important. The classic model of entrepreneurial programs and technical assistance solutions that have worked for the majority community very seldom work for BIPOC entrepreneurs. And I say very seldom because we're trying to, in many cases, we ignore cultural differences, we ignore historical differences, we ignore the equity versus the equality, and we start the race from the same line as opposed to different places because we're running the same race. So how do we make them work in our communities is really the question. And after sharing these links with you on your own time, please go ahead and click through them, learn more about the organizations. We will talk about what we believe the best programs are and why. So at a national level, we have the SCORE chapters of America, which are retired business executives providing volunteer services. You have great chapters and you have very poor chapters all over the country. Also, we have the Women's Business Resource Center that gets some funding from the SBA, the Small Business Development Centers, which I am a member of, and I'm the director of one. And also, most recently, another federal program, which is the Community Navigator pilot program, which as we speak, it's announcing who the winners of the pilot program are going to be across the nation. This is exciting because this is a recognition of the need for targeted investment in communities of color. The other one that is important for government procurement purposes is the DLA, or the Procurement Technical Assistance Program, which helps businesses sell to the government. These are all programs that are offered at no cost to you or to entrepreneurs. So across the United States, there are 900 local Sbdc centers. This is the nationwide network. We are funded by the federal government and supported by state economic development organizations. There's got to be one close to you. The question is it paying enough attention to what matters? Is something that you have to figure out for yourself and maybe encourage them to do a better job with working with our communities. In Pennsylvania, we have 16 centers. We're all represented by host institutions, which are universities. And we are the largest entrepreneurial program in the state. What do we do anyway? So we try to cover all aspects, saying that entrepreneurs start, grow, and prosper. That's our mission, and that's what we help them with. But we do this in two ways. We provide consulting services, which are one-on-one, and also we provide educational programs for entrepreneurs to be able to have the better Excel sheet, launch a better program, reduce their risks, save money. Our models is basically funded by state, federal government, and also a host institution, which in our case is Widener University. Now, at our center, we have focused on supporting Latino entrepreneurs based on the footprint and the territory that we serve. So we created what's called the Center for Inclusive and Sustainable Excellence, supporting Latino entrepreneurs in Pennsylvania. And as a result, we have developed what I believe it's a program that is much more understanding of our local community. We provide all of our services in Spanish, and that includes virtual classes, webinars, consulting, instructional materials, and also an on-demand library, because we believe that entrepreneurs learn in different ways, especially in this case, the Hispanic community. We need to approach them in a different perspective. We have also built a team that looks like our community of bilingual entrepreneurs, and from different walks of life and different specialties, because we figure Hispanic entrepreneurs are doing great in business, are opening businesses quite fast, maybe the fastest group amongst others. I think Asian Americans are also doing the same. However, the success rate of the businesses after 1 year is something that we need to work on at the United States level. Our economic impact has been very good. Since we started this in the pandemic, we've done over $13 million in capital for entrepreneurs, either PPP grant, PPP, idle, bank loans, et cetera, in terms of the recovery. We provided over 86 webinars and served over 1,340 clients. To us, a good program needs to be measurable. We need to tell the story, and certainly for us, it's a pilot that demonstrates what sometimes people don't want to acknowledge. You know, they always say, "Oh, I've tried working with minority entrepreneurs, and they never show up for things." Again, the programs are not geared for them. You're not speaking their language. You're not connecting. We can demonstrate clearly that if you follow basic principles, you get some levels of results. Now, we're not perfect, but we're trying to improve as we go. I shared with you that there's two national models that are important, which are the Community Navigator program, and the Sbdc is launching an inclusivity challenge as well. Why is this important? There's national attention. Maybe in your communities, you can nudge local organizations to put even more attention on what matters. Basically, we also have what we call Powerhouse Organizations. You've heard about the Kaufman Fast Track. Interice has great programming. Goldman Sachs 10,000 small business programs are also great, but these are cohort-driven programs with strong curriculum, right? In addition to that, you have your homegrown or community-grown programs that many of you may be aware. I'm going to leave it at it as it is. I'm going to ask you to come back and look at this slide and ask yourself, who's doing this in my community? Now, key takeaway, and I am a Monopoly buff, so collect $200. Remember that the quality and focus of a technical assistance program is largely tied to those people who lead it. And by that, I mean, sometimes we get lucky and we have the majority community leading great programs to support our communities. And sometimes programs get better when you have somebody that is representative of the community leading those efforts. And I guess this is the slide that I would really like you to consider. From my experience, there's a standard baseline criteria that best positions entrepreneurship programs, specifically the participants, for success. Obviously, you need to have trusted industry specific and relationship-based professionals in your organization. They need to be culturally competent and language competent if you're dealing with different communities that speak different languages. You can find that there's strong curriculum out there, but the ones that I really like have also guest experts. They have CEO mentoring groups, peer-to-peer learning. They create some type of growth plan at the end or the conclusion of the program. They have follow-up one-on-one consulting, but most importantly, they provide you with different sources of capital. Key takeaway here, capital. You guys know that these basic capital are here, right? However, I want you to expand your thoughts and also acknowledge that established entrepreneur needs financial, human, and social capital. But in reality, in our communities, what we need to grow and sustain a business are all these types of capital that are outlined here. I'm not going to go into all of them, but I just want to highlight the social capital. Basically, the social capital, I believe, trumps all the other capital, right? Basic principle, social capital is, you go to dad, say, Dad, can you help me review this contract for my business? Dad says, sign it. When I speak with many entrepreneurs, they don't know who to go to ask the same question. So takeaway for you, simply put, technical assistance and small business programs that best position participants for success basically focus heavily in adding value with social capital. What is that? connections, advocacy, you have access to new networks, access to contracts, and inclusive investment participation. The following 2 slides, I would like you guys to go and take a look at and go through the links. Basically, there are small disadvantaged business programs in the United States. The government put some of them. Anchor institutions have some of them. Once you look at this slide, you can click on them and understand the requirements, but also remember that anchor institutions play a big role. You need certifications. So you need to work with certifications in your community or organizations that are third-party certifiers to be able to support your entrepreneurs access better deals, government contracts, or even local contracts with municipalities. So there's a whole bunch of them for your benefit. Please look through them at your will. I will also send you a PowerPoint presentation that details all of these. And your key takeaway here is when you're thinking about government contracting, don't put all your eggs in the government contracting basket. There are several tips included with this presentation that you can take away to make sure that you're working. Part of what's important for you to consider is models. I have been looking at all these models for several years, and they're doing great stuff for the communities. So you have the Mid-South Minority Business Council that basically works with private partners. You have Cleveland's Greater University Circle Initiative, the Wyomissing Foundation, which is a local foundation, and an example with Tishman Speyer and Harvard University that provides equity participation to entrepreneurs. With that in mind, I wanted to start wrapping up my conversation, but leaving you with this, because when we are going to work in our community, technical assistance only takes you so far. Basically, social capital that you can build or bake in organizations that you're working with are going to be the determining factor. Take, for example, the Mid-South Minority Business Council here. So they started in 1973, and it took them over 16 years to become independent. But what they do is they certify and work with minority entrepreneurs, minority disadvantaged business owners, as they call them, and they connect them directly with large corporations so they can bid. But not only they connect them, they advocate for them. They also advocate for diversity and inclusion with these organizations. All the board members are part of large corporations, such as the guys from, you have Memphis, you have so many large corporations, including some of the large hotel companies, including FedEx that are close by. So all in all, they harness the private sector to support diversity, the diverse community. Cleveland has been studying this for years. They have many great examples. I encourage you to spend a few hours studying them as well. And understanding how you can get involved in your community. Specifically, if you are a foundation, the role of the foundation is very important in all this. The foundation is a convener. Sometimes the foundation could also invest to get people together, but to lead them to where you want them to go. For that, I will give you a quick example of the Wyomissing Foundation. The Wyomissing Foundation is a local foundation in Berks County, Pennsylvania. If you know what pantyhoses are, well, 100 years ago, they created the machines that fabricated them and sold them. They made a lot of money. As a result, they built jobs for over 60,000 people in the area, and they even had hospitals in large campuses. That's correct. The Toon family, I saw a comment coming through. They also built the first planned community in the United States, which is Wyomissing, Pennsylvania. Anyway, they left money. They created the Why Missing Foundation. I'm a member and a board member of the Why Missing Foundation as well. And there are a whole bunch of white people with a great heart focused on what's the best next thing for our community. So what do? They have made substantial investments funding CDFIs by the millions. So then they can lend to minority communities in the territories that they serve. They have also funded technical assistance to support inclusive projects. They have also supported workforce development projects. But this is a labor of love that takes years. But here's the will of a foundation trying to stir the direction of the ship towards the benefit of the community for a more equitable community. The last one that I have to comment is Tishman Speyer and Harvard. They have included pretty much what I called equity and inclusion requirements for their investors. So Harvard basically created a $1 billion mixed use plan for life sciences. And they said, whoever the developer is going to be, I want them to have 5% of the project's equity ownership that would go to minority owned businesses. And people of color specifically is what they put or they baked in their contracts. So Tishman Speyer actually did it and was able to find a network with entrepreneurs from different communities all over the United States to ensure that they met that principle. And the key takeaway is, if you're an anchor institution, how can you bake in some of these DEI principles in order to benefit the community? So to consider, think about this as you take the next step today. Who are the players in your community who would consider the bending of institutional and individual wealth to be open to business participation from the BIPOC community? Who are those? The next one that I have for you is figure this out. Can you think about 3 major employers in your community? And do you think they're willing to make investments and pursue DEI principles? I like number 7, which are, who are the doers with institutional stick-to-itiveness in your community? Those are the ones you want to be talking with and furthering the agenda that I'm hopeful you will be able to achieve and the plans as a result of the strategic planning that you will perform as a result of this cohort. So this is my last slide, right? If there's something I'd like to leave you with is, here are the 5 takeaways for your equity plan. Number 1, find the doers who are willing to stick to it. Support and design programs and technical assistance to enhance the social and financial capital of the participants. Mentoring is important, and we all know that word, but sponsoring entrepreneurs is even more important. These organizations that I shared with you have been in the business of sponsoring, and you get great results. You're advocating for them. The 4th one is ensure that you're pursuing DEI principles for investments. And lastly, when you can, figure out how you can institutionalize the approach. And I beg you to please take a look at the examples that I shared before, because this will give you some good ideas on how to proceed. I want to thank you for your time. I want to keep in touch. If I could be of service, please feel free to give me a call. I look forward to working with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lenin. That was great. So very, very quick intermission here. So we had just one question in the chat. Before I get to that, there were a lot of comments. People really loved what you had to say about the fact that small business programs and technical assistance programs help to mitigate risk, but don't focus on building wealth, and that to build wealth, you have to help people make money, save money, and invest money what my bookkeeper says to me is make your money work for you. She always reminds me of that. So that was something I think just a great takeaway. The fact that a lot of programs that work for majority or white communities don't necessarily work for BIPOC communities. And that's because we're running the same race, but not all starting from the same place. And then I think really big takeaway that you brought to the fore today about social capital being possibly the most important form of capital, and that the programs that everyone here on this call are implementing or growing should definitely have a focus on that. So the question was about when, Lenin, when you brought up the 5 types of entrepreneurs and early on, Dustin, I think from Las Vegas, had a question about where do social entrepreneurs fit into that rubric?
Oh, wow. Wonderful question. Yeah. So basically, I think all of you are social entrepreneurs by the fact that you're here and trying to ensure that change is made. I can't include all the types of entrepreneurs. I considered social entrepreneurs. There's also the gig entrepreneur that you've probably heard and how that impacts the economy. I was focusing more really on the general types of entrepreneurs that technical assistance providers are going to be able to see. Not all technical assistance providers want to even deal with non-for-profit agencies or social entrepreneurs, because their mission is really to ensure that taxes are created and that the economy grows in that way. So also pay attention to that, because that's an opportunity. Social entrepreneurship is more and more, everybody's talking about it, and it's becoming very, very mainstream. And the idea that you guys could participate in a program like this is basically, in my mind, the best definition of social entrepreneurship, building better communities.
Great. That's a great point, that there's lots of other types of entrepreneurs as well. And I stand corrected, Dustin's from central Minnesota, not Las Vegas. So I am now going to hand it over to Dr. Campbell for his presentation. Thanks so much, Lenin.
Well, first off, I just have to acknowledge Dr. Lenin Agudo. Congratulations. That was a fantastic presentation, and I even learned a few things. So thank you for sharing this space with me. To the family here, good afternoon. If anyone's in the West Coast, good morning still. I'm going to echo a few things that Lenin mentioned, particularly around the importance of cultural competence and social capital, just a little bit. I'm going to operationalize it for you all in this presentation. So let's go ahead and get into it. And Sylvie, just so you know, I'm setting my alarm right now for 33 minutes, just in case you give me that additional time. How about that? All right.
Good.
So if everyone can see my screen, I have to say I'm ecstatic to be here with you all, because this is an outward manifestation of something you've all agreed to when you signed up for this program, which is you all signed up to be a part of this transformational journey that you all call the Rock Cohort Program. And I just happen to be from the Rock, Rochester, New York. I'm sorry if anybody's ever flown there. And so I'm here to talk to you a little bit about building wealth through entrepreneur-led economic development. And we're going to talk a little bit about the work that I did in Rochester as the former or outgoing director of the Mayor's Office of Community Wealth Building. All right. So I like to do a couple of introductions to myself, because I especially in spaces like this, there's 66 of us, and different folks receive information differently. So my folks on the call right now from the African context will know what I mean when I say I'm my ancestors' wildest dreams manifested, and a brother from around the way. And I'm an anti-racist organizer and network builder. Just to pull a few of these out. The last two I want to lift up is I'm a recovering public official in about 7 days, right? I've been with the Mayor's Office of Community Wealth Building for 3 years, 3 months now, and I'm a doctor of management. For those of you who are more accustomed to traditional bio slides, this is a little bit about my background. The last 18 years has allowed me to investigate these topics as a small business owner, a serial entrepreneur, having run 6 or 7 companies now since 2003. a higher education administrator for about 7.5 years, and a public administrator for the last three years, 3 months. And I think I went to school too long, but hopefully the way I synthesized this conversation might prove helpful for our Q&A. So the way I've laid out the agenda on the slides that follow, we'll get into, at a high level, what are we trying to accomplish in this 33 minutes together or less? And we're going to do a little level set just to echo some themes that you've all been wrestling with since you began the ROC cohort program. But we're going to do a deep dive into understanding the customer, picking up on some of those different segments that Dr. Agudo mentioned. And then I'm going to glaze over entrepreneurial ecosystem building because I think you all have that background in your toolkit. But then I want to show you how I took those two things to do the work that we've done in Rochester and then summarize these concepts. Keep going. I want to make sure we're together. The presentation objectives are threefold: to give you insight into the dynamics confronting entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial ecosystem building as a practice. So we're moving upstream from technical assistance to building that network in practice. We're going to focus on informing your transformation agendas, knowing that by the end of this cohort, you all will be implementing things in your communities. But I'm hoping to also stimulate reflection and create opportunities for collaboration, because this is really about social capital. And so I know we were here to talk about equity, but I want to broaden the table. In my work, I use this mantra that we abide by anti-racist principles, just to pick up on the fact that access and belonging and inclusion and diversity are all relevant topics. But as the commonly, probably cliche photo illustrates here, you know, equality and equity doesn't get rid of the actual structural barriers that creates the need to accommodate people's differences. Why don't we remove the fence? And even this isn't fully transformational from my perspective as a scholar practitioner, because I'd love to see these people either playing in the game or sitting in the concession stands where they can have access to peanuts and popcorn and cotton candy and actually not have to stand the whole game. And so with that, our friends at the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond has advanced these anti-racist organizing principles since 1980, coming out of 1960s and 50s civil rights movement organizing strategies. They talk about how important it is to analyze where power sits in different systems if you want to change how outcomes go. They talk about the importance of developing leadership, not just executive leaders and middle managers, but out in the community and actually on the front lines. They talk about reshaping gatekeeping, understanding that we all control at least one gate, even if that's the gate to our homes, or gates to our credit card information, or gates to processes or accesses to policies and procedures. And they talk about how important it is to identify and analyze manifestations of racism. And here we're not talking about, I hate you, Lomax, because you're Black. What we're talking about is structural and systemic manifestations of racism. Like, in order to get this 50-50 matching grant that's covered by HUD funds, you know, you have to have 50% of what you're asking for. Well, some populations don't have that. We're talking about learning from history so we don't repeat the same thing, maintaining accountability. That's the transparency we often talk about. We also talk about the importance of sharing culture through the Undoing Racism workshop that the People's Institute puts on, because that's what makes us human. It brings humanity into the work of transformation. And then, of course, they talk about internalized racial oppression. Well, you know, we call this imposter syndrome in some spaces now. That's one example of it. But you can be socialized to believe you're inferior or superior. And so we got to work on the internal side of things and actually undo those structures and systems and mentalities that makes all of this work suboptimal. So now let's talk a little bit about the customer. When you're doing ecosystem building work, there's primary and secondary tiers of customers. According to the Kaufman Foundation Entrepreneurial Ecosystem Building Playbook, the third version of it, they define the entrepreneur support organizations as any organizations that provide services to small businesses or entrepreneurs. And not all small businesses are entrepreneurs, small business owners, right? And all entrepreneurs don't ultimately keep running their business. Some people set it up and sell it off. And so who are those organizations in your community that support those processes and activities? And a level up, I think Lenin referred to them as powerhouse organizations. Kaufman Foundation in their eShip work referred to them as national resources providers who provide supports and resources to the ecosystem builders who work within entrepreneur support organizations typically. And so you got three different stakeholders at this primary level. Who are those organizers? Who are the ecosystem builders in your communities that are working at your local entrepreneur or regional entrepreneur support organizations to help transform the lives of entrepreneurs and small business owners? That's the question. At the secondary stage, you have the entrepreneurs and the small business owners themselves. The playbook refers to entrepreneurs as the makers, doers, and dreamers. They're the ones that tend to create the most jobs, as you all already know. And, you know, I'm going to be very candid. I'm from the neighborhood. I don't use the term minority to describe Black and brown people. When I went to Rochester Institute of Technology, since the 1960s, the term Alana, referring to people of African, Latin, Asian, and Native American descent, has been in use across the academy, philanthropy, and several other spaces. I won't go deep into that. But these are the secondary and ultimate customers of this work. And as you saw, they tend to cluster into 4 or more areas. And so you have your innovation-led, which we saw in the last presentation. And micro-enterprise encompasses businesses that have less than 10 employees. And whether they're doing it as a full-time gig or in the gig economy or as a side hustle, you know, that kind of encompasses that, just to show that we're in congruence across presentations. And then your traditional businesses, the Main Street brick and mortar businesses, and then those that are ready to scale. This is important because each of these businesses goes through the business development life cycle. At least that's what I was taught in B school at the undergraduate level. And this is one way to capture the different stages of business development. Some of you probably are very familiar with this model: seed, launch, grow, establishment, expansion, decline, succession, and exit. Some people throw shakeout in there under establishment because as markets mature, you know, folks get bought out and M&As happen and things of that nature, mergers and acquisitions. But in my public work, we broadly broke these out into startup phases, stay-up phases, scale-up phases, and split-up phases. And so the reason why I list this up is because entrepreneurs at each stage of the life cycle have different needs, they have different challenges, they have different money sources, they have different milestones they're trying to attain, and there are different inputs and different outputs. Now, for the sake of illustration, I just kind of pulled out micro and Main Street businesses to ask the question, who are you serving in your ecosystem? In fact, I want to show you a diagram that's in draft form that I've been working on with some colleagues in Rochester, and we call it the Business Development Lifecycle Activity Matrix. I'm going to pull this up for you. Hopefully we're still together. You all can see this chart here. You all are the first crop of people in the entire world, other than the 3 people that are working on this, to see this draft. This takes the startup phase and says, look at the seed stage business. I'm just going to do 1 or 2 of them. This stage is about soul searching for the entrepreneur, also sometimes called the idea or the development stage where there's no proven market. The challenges are, do you have a viable business idea or concept? Who's the market? You know, the economy is a challenge itself, like COVID. Accounting management, how are you managing the funds? Where does the money come from typically? And I'll zoom in a little bit just in case this is challenging to read. Maybe that's too much. Let's come back. There we go. So just so that you can see as I drive through here, ultimately seed stage entrepreneurs are trying to become concept ready, meaning that they have a viable business concept ready to go. They want to become product ready, meaning they have at least 1 item to bring to the market. They want to become formation ready, meaning that they're ready to actually establish a legal structure. And they want to be capital ready at this stage. Who's doing these milestones well in your community? clearly, if you want capital, you have to have a certain credit score and maybe 1 or 2 years of tax returns. Maybe you need proof of residence if you're being funded by a municipality, and so on and so forth. But what you're trying to produce is a business model that's viable, maybe the structure, maybe feasibility of the idea, a business plan, etc. As we move down, I'm going to jump past launch because I think you all are familiar with that one. Let's look at growth. So when we start talking growth stage businesses, they're trying to formalize their operations and revenue as their customers increase alongside new opportunities. Sometimes it's called the survival stage. But as you can see, their challenges are effective management and allocation of resources, and learning how to train and delegate staff, or accounting management, because now they have more money. Competition probably begins to encroach in on them because if they're making money, other people see it. So they're looking to become growth ready, maybe even certification ready. Such certifications over here as MWBE, Section 3, Disadvantaged Business Enterprise, Service Disabled Veteran, you get the point. Maybe they, once getting certified, want to start procuring from government and big businesses. These are different issues. These are different strategies. The point I'm harping on here is that no one organization do all of these phases and stages well. And so if you don't specialize and share the work, you run the risk of being suboptimal in your ability to serve entrepreneurs. So I just wanted to kind of give you a taste of that. We can come back to it if you're interested in the Q&A. Back to our regularly scheduled program here. So with that, the other lens I'd like to bring up is this idea of understanding the customer from a philosophical and culturally contextual standpoint. Now, when I was working on my dissertation, I was able to convince one of the most brilliant men I've ever met in my life to sit on my dissertation committee. His name is Dr. Edwin J. Nichols, and he is a 90-year-old industrial and clinical psychologist. In the 1940s, he was denied entry into graduate programs in the US, master's and doctorate level training, on the basis of being a Negro, as he was told by the admissions counselors, because that no one would hire him for the practicums in the workforce at that time. So he ended up going over to Austria and Germany and Austria respectively, to pursue his master's and doctorate degrees in philosophy. And when he came back after studying philosophy and psychology at those levels abroad, he came back and began to analyze what we call racism and the challenges that result in those manifestations. And he came up with this model called the philosophical aspects of cultural difference. Time permitting, I'll show you the full one-page framework, but I kind of extracted just the part about people of African descent, Latinx, and Arab, equatorial people who share an ethnic worldview philosophically. Now, philosophy, not to go too deep, but I do want to get this information to you, is broken out into 4 disciplines. The first one is axiology, which means the study of value. Where do cultural groups place the highest value? Now, people of European descent, I'm not talking about over the last 10 years, 50 years, or even 100 years. We're talking 5 to 10,000 years, 20, 30,000 years growing up on the world stage. Think Ice Age, think 10,000 years of inclement weather and scarcity, which is the fundamental problem of economics and politics dealing with who has the right to control scarce resources. Objectivity and objects becomes the way by which you determine your value. So how big is your house? How many degrees do you have? How many friends? How many people report to you? What processes do you control? Hierarchy comes out of this philosophical underlying assumption that says either you have it or you don't. And so you become competition. And we promote that by doing competitions, business pitch competitions, for example, comes out of the mind of mainstream assumptions. I'm not calling it good or bad, but I do want to contrast that when we look at equatorial people, going around the equator, people of Latin descent, Arab descent, African descent, who've never experienced an ice age, who've always had abundance until desertification kicked in and they just migrated. What allowed them to survive and thrive on the world stage for tens of thousands of years is the personal relationships that they develop, which is why Lenin keeps talking about social capital. This is why we tend to go into the humanities, because interpretation, qualitative research, subjectivity tends to lean well with our natural mindsets. And we tend to be more collectivistic, more collaborative, and less competitive, which is why some of the wrestlings that some of your organizations may experience is something called the crabs in the barrel syndrome. But the reality of it is, the barrel is not a natural environment for crabs. And in the natural environment, if a predator was trying to attack one of them, they would grab onto one another's legs so that you can't snatch them away. Hence, being collaborative and collectivistic. When you begin to start talking about how you learn and develop within these different cultural contexts, it's the study of knowledge, or what is knowledge. Philosophically speaking, epistemology. And we know something in the mainstream world when we can quantify it, when we can count and measure it. These are not my words, these are Dr. Nichols' words over a 70+ year career in practice. And so we tend to be inductive. You know, if you do this and you do that, and we look at this tree, which is why a dissertation, for example, focuses on just this one pen top. We're studying the emulsion that produced the plastic of the pen that I'm holding up. We become process-oriented. Can you first pull together your documents? Can you download the application? Can you complete the application? Can you pull the things together? Well, for people of African, Latinx, and Arab descent, we're people-driven. We're holistic. We focus on the big picture, and we want to get straight to the point. And so the point is, when these things are at odds with one another, they check out. They say, I'm not going through that process. It's too convoluted. No one's here to help me. How does that inform how you design your programs? Just like this is a cohort program where you're collaborating, even though you're working within your individual communities to implement things, this sense of community or social capital is very valuable to what you all are doing. In fact, you get multiple ways of learning and being and knowing. The remaining two dimensions of philosophy, or the philosophical aspects of cultural difference, is logic. How might cultural groups reason to get an answer? In the mainstream, it's dichotomous. Did you get the award or did you not get the award? And oh, by the way, family, as our dear brother Lenin was presenting, Rochester was announced as a part of the Community Navigator program. I wrote that grant. So I'm excited. We did get the award. But it's polarized. Either they report to you or they report to me. Either you have the capital or you don't. Either you have stable income or you don't, which is why it's difficult for small businesses to get a housing loan, because they don't have stable income all the time. And so that becomes a structural barrier. And there's a scarcity mindset coming off of an eon of experiences of scarcity. Whereas to the contrary, we tend to be more both and in our sense making. And there's a continuum, and there's an abundance mindset, because even if it's our last, I'm the baby of 9 out of my family. I don't know what it means to be poor, even though we were broke growing up, because there was always enough. My mother would cut up a chicken and put that in a pot with some rice and some onion or scallions and salt and pepper and some crushed red pepper. And we called that chicken perlo, and they fed all of us, you know, because there was always a way to make it stretch. That's the mindset. How did your program begins to inculcate an abundance mindset where you can be a separate business that competes against the other restaurant, but collaborate to lower your costs by cooperatively buying things like salt and pepper and ketchup and mustard, the things that both of your businesses are going to require. We're talking about changing a paradigm. And then lastly, being or living, philosophically called ontology. In the mainstream, everything is discrete, discontinuous, and separate. Even this call is a binary conversation based on zeros and ones that have allowed us to have Zoom. However, in our context for people of African descent and Latin descent and Arab descent, and I'm going to show you a little bit about the indigenous and Asian folks in our country as well. there's a spiritual element. There's complementarity baked into the equation, the philosophy. And I'm just going to jump out again just because I like being a little more dynamic with pulling things together for you. This is Dr. Nichols' framework. I just want to unpack it for the sake of time. So you can see, I'm just going to pull it up just a little bit more. When you start talking axiology of people of Asian descent and Polynesians, there's a member group value versus member to member or member to object orientation. And then similarly for indigenous peoples, member to great spirit value system. Now, these are not conscious things. In fact, when Du Bois talked about it, he called this is what he meant when he said there's a double consciousness that makes us schizophrenic or stressed, because we're trying to hold two worldviews at the same time, which is inequitable. But I just wanted to show you that it exists. So let's jump back in. So now that we understand the customer, let's quickly touch the ecosystem. An entrepreneurial ecosystem, per the Kauffman Foundation's playbook, is that network of people supporting the entrepreneurs and that culture of trust. So we're talking social capital and collaboration, so that those things, those mechanisms, those entities can operate effectively together. And they break down into macro and micro networks. Here's an example of that. So this was an old mapping about 5-6 years ago of Rochester's first attempt through the Rochester Downtown Development Corporation to begin to map Rochester's urban entrepreneurial ecosystem. And you can see, just like businesses tend to cluster into different spaces, the ESOs, as we call entrepreneur support organizations, or ESOs, also cluster into different groups, like those that provide training and boot camps. And we got Sbdc on here somewhere, by the way, and SCORE. So this is important because just like businesses go through the business development lifecycle, these organizations go through it too. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. The other aspect I want to touch on is the different domains of the ecosystem. So if you're not addressing funding, the culture, the role of universities, local and global markets, government policy, you're not doing this work fully. There were some principles that the eShip Summit put out through their playbook, centering the entrepreneurs. There was also some goals. And I'm glazing through these because I believe you are all already familiar with this space. So in Rochester, as I mentioned, I started with the Mayor's Office of Community Wealth Building as the director in August 2018. When I first got there, I was like, what is community wealth building? And 7 months later, I had a full strategic plan with my mighty small team of 4. And we defined it as a comprehensive approach to social and economic problems that was inclusive and focused on asset building. And then it was community-based, meaning that it was a bottoms-up strategy that occurred at all levels of human social systems. And what it looks like when it works well is increased talents and capacities and capital, but also local expenditure flows and financial empowerment and greater access to opportunities. And democratic ownership of assets and resources is a nod to the importance of collaboration that transpires from one generation to the next. And this model on the right, my team developed, that basically says if you just throw money at it, i.e. invest, that's not enough. If you just run workshops and classes through education, that's not enough. If you assist people by rolling up your sleeves and diving in on the work, but you don't also invest in educate and advise, that's not enough. And if you just stand back and coach from the sideline, i.e. advise, without investing in educating and assisting, that's not enough. You have to do all 4. And that was how we spent the last 3 years. It also operates at different levels. So examples include individual development accounts or family development accounts, as some of you may be familiar, starting a business, taking advantage of earned income tax credits at the family and group level. Institutionally, it's what we're doing right now. And then as a municipal or regional level, ecosystem building covers much broader than a single or small cluster of institutions. And this is what we were able to accomplish in our first 3 years of operation. I'll just give you about a second to see a little under $20 million in 3 years, a Kiva program. We launched a $13.5 million Revitalized Rochester Fund focused on 8 corridors that hadn't been invested since the 1950s that were predominantly Black and Brown communities. But the two I want to lift up here is our ecosystem building and our resource partner enhancement program. To do that, I want to share with you our theory of change. We said that based on our friends at McKinsey & Company, we got to move people through from income-generated wealth to asset-generated wealth as a fundamental funnel or construct. On the far left, number one, taxpayer dollars provides municipalities and counties and states with the resources to provide resources that are available to everybody. I think we all understand that. As communities get educated, they take advantage of job opportunities so they can do different things like invest in 401ks later, buy a home, and eventually their savings or relief, alleviation of debt or matching earned income tax credit strategies or savings to allow folks to do family investing is ultimately the continuum we want people to be on. This is a journey, not a sprint. No one organization can do it all well. We also employed evidence-based management where decisions set at the nexus of the evaluated or scholarly literature, stakeholder preferences. So we worked with community to build what we're going to share with you. The local context, regional context, the organizational actors and circumstances, and then practitioner experience or judgment. And so we were awarded our first $100,000 grant on August 28th from Living Cities as a part of their cohort 5 of their City Accelerator program. And those funds allowed us to host 4 focus groups, one with all Black people who are business owners, one with Latinx community members, women, and any business that made over $100,000 and had some dealing with the city in the past. It could have been permitting, zoning, getting a loan or whatever. And then we also administered a survey and received a number of responses from small businesses, which we later presented in Long Beach, California. The project team was also required to go through an undoing racism training for the first time in December 2018 down in Austin. And we were mind blown when we came back. We realized we need this analysis in Rochester to inform our work. And so we used a portion of that $100,000 to conduct 3 of those trainings and had 85 participants explicitly attend the trainings in Rochester in October 2019. We then proceeded with a relationship with a company called SourceLink out of Kansas City, Missouri. They're a product or a program of the University of Missouri, Kansas City. And they're in about 70 different communities across the country, including Puerto Rico. We identified 150 entrepreneur support organizations or ESOs in Rochester's region and initially got 35 of them to subscribe to the system. And within about 8 months, we got up to 54. We also established a leadership team, a Nexus I-90 leadership team, made up of representatives from about 15 different organizations. And they've been meeting bi-weekly ever since the September of 2019. And then we also raised additional funds to expand the back end of the system. This is what it turned into. It turned into this nested hub and spoke model where digital resources sit in the center of the work to bring everybody together. There's an organizational hub, which was the city in partnership with the Rochester Economic Development Corporation, that oversees or administers the digital infrastructure. And then we were able to invest funds in a cohort program where we have identified 6 different organizations that provide supports to entrepreneurs to go through a 2-year experience to improve the cultural and contextual relevance of their service offerings. And that's for producing new policies, new programs, new resources, and scorecards. These were the founding partners of what we call Nexus I-90. And this is a little bit of what the website looked like if you go to nexusi90.org, nexusi90.org. There's a resource navigator down here that allows you to say, I live in zip code 14621. I'm looking for support within 10 miles of me, particularly financial assistance or site selection assistance. And if it's financial, do I want crowdfunded? Do I want equity? Do I want debt? Whatever. It returns for you the query out of the 54, who specializes in it. so you go to the right place at the right time. We're in talks with our sister cities of Syracuse and Buffalo, New York, to expand the network. I won't dive here. And right now, Nexus I-90 is going to hit the road to Buffalo. They're actively in the process of expanding there. But trying to get that alignment so that entrepreneurs have a broader supply chain of support. We then said all services are not created equal, and thought that it was appropriate to launch this program that we call the Resource Partner Enhancement Program. We awarded $1.5 million in grants and technical assistance to this cohort of organizations that focus on Latinx-owned businesses, Black-owned businesses, people operating in formal food-based businesses, women of color in business at Walker's Legacy Foundation, people who were previously incarcerated through Greater Works, and low to moderate income residents who are looking to get free legal services with formations and establishing their legal docs and other supports for their business. They are supported by this cohort of coaches that come from the community. They're all small business owners who've had tremendous careers in different sectors. They also work collaboratively and independently with their clients and across the cohort. The idea is, just like a hand has 5 different fingers, each digit is working to improve or enhance itself to be relevant to the community, but they also have to pull together into a fist collectively to provide a supply chain of supports to businesses. Now, this is unprecedented in Rochester, and I've not seen a program like this elsewhere. They did go through the Undoing Racism training back during MLK Day weekend, and all of their organizations are now listed on Nexus I-90, and they all have subscriptions to the back-end client relationship management system so that they can do data sharing and client referrals and reporting, so that when my business comes to one of your banks to get funding, you know, all of my information is already in the system. You know, so you don't have to ask me, well, what's the name of your business? What are your goals? Who have you been working with? It's all in their case file that's being shared across these organizations. They also were introduced to these different national resource providers during their kickoff convening so that they can opt to adapt or adopt their programs into Rochester so that they're not building from scratch. Why start over when you can scale what works? This graphic here shows the resources we raised between August 2018 and yesterday. By the way, my last day with City of Rochester is Thursday next week. That's why I say former. But this is the support system financially that we've raised to support this ecosystem building work. And samples of what we can report on is before you now. So there's collective impact as an example. Those are our community collaboration metrics that we can track now through the system. And these are the community commerce metrics that we can capture through the system. So let me summarize these ideas by saying, when you want social transformation, you have to have paradigm shift. We went from rules-based, because remember, I work in government, where it's about the policies, practices, and procedures and the precedents, to being principle-based, abiding by anti-racist principles. We went from a monocultural or individualist orientation to one that recognized our cultural diversity and went as far as to say, how can we authentically show up as one another? We went from being universalistic in our approaches, at least within the Mayor's Office of Community Wealth Building and among our network partners, to using culturally relevant approaches. And we went from a top-down approach or leadership style to a bottoms-up, inside-out, outside-in, and top-down. We went from traditional practices like trying to attract businesses to Rochester or trying to increase the number of exports or scale a business to saying, let's support our micro enterprises and our Main Street businesses and help them grow. We went from a deficit base of risk mitigation strategies to asset-based seeking risk strategies. And we went from the low-hanging fruit mentality, where you try to carve off the lowest things that you can do quick, to cultivating the whole tree because you can feed more people. So with that, I'll stop there, and hopefully you've enjoyed our time together.
Thank you so much, Dr. Campbell. So much information. And I think, just two highlights, because I want to make sure that everybody has time to ask questions. I think the fact that there's these different life cycle stages, the stay up, scale up, split up, I think those were great kind of quick tags that people can remember in terms of the fact that different businesses have different goals, or different entrepreneurs have different goals. And then, I think you really highlighted so nicely the fact that not everyone has the same worldview, not everyone sees the world in the same way, and that has to be front and center when it comes to designing programs and serving entrepreneurs. So there was one question, and then I'm going to make sure people can raise their hand through the chat function, and I can call on you. But Ken from Las Vegas, I think I got that one right this time, asked, did Rochester run into resistance from people who were used to providing services in a mainstream way? And how did they respond to that resistance, if so? And also, did the success rate improve?
Yeah, that's a question I get a lot, actually. I normally explain that there are certain, I'm going to say, entities in a community that nobody wants to be on their bad side. Philanthropy or foundation is one, because nonprofits get their money from them. And government is the other. Government regulates. They determine so many things, permits, zoning, right? They make grants. And literally, we've been able to raise so much money because the mayor was supporting the work. And because we were able to have 8 partners, 12 partners, 15 partners in some instances, write letters of support to go after funds and say, listen, we're trying to raise $750,000. We already have $350 to go towards it. So you're not investing in this by yourself. You're not the only one taking the risk in what we're doing in Rochester across this broad-based coalition we've organized. So literally, and I say this unapologetically and without trying to sound, like arrogant or anything, but no one tells us no. And it's because we know how to approach people. We want to show that this is the will of the community. And if they don't like that, they don't say they don't like it. They say, how can I be a part of the squad? So we invite people in because there's an abundance mindset. I don't get resistance.
That's great. Great to hear. It looks like Nick Steele has a question. Nick?
Thank you, Dr. Campbell. Appreciate the time. Definitely a great presentation. It's very similar to what we're working on in Las Vegas from a concept standpoint. Clearly, your execution has been well done. I'm curious to just learn, like, what structures did you use to be able to raise capital? Did you set up a separate organization, or did you use existing organizations? You got a lot of buy-in from a number of different organizations, but at the start, how did you do it from a structural standpoint?
Sure. So I was new to government when I got there in August, and so I was told that this is the way we do it, right? I came up against the culture. Fortunately, I spent 6 years studying organizational culture change. And so I said, okay, what are our options? Well, they said, well, if it's over $10,000 going in or out, you got to get council approval. However, if you go through the Rochester Economic Development Corporation, that's a separate 501c3 organization that the city set up in 1983. You don't have to get council approval to at least apply and to receive the funds. Now, once you try to transfer it from Redco to the city of Rochester's coffers, if it's over $10,000, you got to get permission. And I'm like, that's fine. Let's get it in the door, and then we'll work the bureaucracy on the back end. That worked for us. And as we got good at it, I said, okay, Redco, I'm giving you a lot of work. I'll let you take 3% of it. And we negotiated a fiscal sponsor agreement that also took about 4 months to go through the council process and their board process. But once it was in place, they agreed to allow us to raise all of our funds through them. And the beautiful thing about that strategy is that I did this off of a $20,000 operating budget. That is what I got. At my height, my staff was 6 people, including me, and we raised all this money through our partners. And so if we were looking to use taxpayer dollars locally to do this stuff, we would have got a lot of resistance, Sylvie. But because we use foundation money and we leveraged local banks matching foundation money, that's why we were able to experiment. And as it worked, we then said, okay, we know that there's also political risk in this space. So instead of trying to hoard these programs in government, let's put it out into our nonprofit partners. So who's going to hate you when you're giving them programs in the capital to operate? Selfless servant leadership.
Thanks, Lomax. And yes, yes, yes. I'm also a recovering government official and definitely getting the resources through public-private partnerships. For those of you who are running governments is definitely beneficial. Any other questions? We have 2 more minutes, so I think we have time for maybe one more quick question. Is that you again, Nick?
It is. I mean, I figure I can keep asking questions. Just as a quick follow-up, would you recommend that the benefits of working inside an organization like the Economic Development Council or another government agency that would be similar in another market would be the way to go, like in terms of still giving you the autonomy. And I like your approach too, spreading the services and the capital to have other organizations help you that are outside of your organization is a great way to go. But I'm just wondering in terms of the still maintaining your autonomy for the actual program and concept. How did that manifest?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I have a progressive mayor. She's outgone now, Mayor Loveland Warren. But in essence, Redco was a part of the city. It was under our Department of Neighborhood and Business Development, and the commissioner sat at the chair of the board. And the mayor realized we were hamstrung from an economic development standpoint because since the 70s, as suburbanization happened, not to go too deep into our history, Rochester was blighted. It was the hole in the economic development donut. And we learned that our friends in Newark, New Jersey had split out an organization called Brick City Development Corporation back in the early 2000s or so, and was under Cory Booker's administration. And they were operating independently from the city, but their sole customer was the city of Newark. And at that time, that allowed them to do things that they couldn't do under government because of the bureaucratic culture. And so when we sought to replicate that, the mayor said, let's spin off Redco, let's give it a CEO, let's have it with its own staff, and you all need to focus on building an economic development strategy for the city of Rochester to fill that hole. I wholeheartedly advocate for that strategy. Just like when I was the chair of the Black Chamber of Commerce in Rochester, we looked at having a 501c3 and a 501c6 so that the 6 can provide advocacy and the 501c3 can fundraise. That strategy works. And I think that, as I said before, entrepreneur support organizations are no different from businesses. It's just their designation and their mission is different. So the same strategy should work. It just takes more time and more coordination to do it, to build it.
Awesome. Well, we are out of time. Nick, thank you for the questions. And both to Dr. Campbell, Lenin, thank you both so much for your time. I'm going to hand this over to Sloan to wrap us up.
Yeah, no, I just want to echo our thanks to having you both. I think your presentations complemented each other well, and there were some great questions. So I know we're a minute over. Really quickly, I'll just say a reminder that we will send out these slides, the recording. On Monday, we will send you out some links to sign up for technical assistance. And then also remember that we are meeting next Thursday for the next session. We're not skipping a week because of the upcoming holidays. So just make that mental note. And yeah, as usual, if you have any questions or anything process oriented, please just shoot me, Allie, or Sylvia a note and we will get back to you. So thank you all and have a great rest of your afternoon. And thanks again to Lomax and Lenin for joining us today.